Everyone dreams of finding lost treasure, but it isn't as common as it seems in the movies. So imagine my delight when I was little to discover these old trunks in the attic. They had belonged to my Irish ancestors, who came to America in the 1840s due to the potato famine. Though the steamer trunks were sadly devoid of any pirate gold or jewels, it was full to the brim with my family's history and artifacts, which for someone like me is even better than treasure. There were letters, jewelry, hats, clothing, and photo albums. And while I was home for Thanksgiving, I decided to glance through one of those photo albums. Amidst the classic portraits and playing my favorite game to play while looking at Victorian photos, is this person dead or alive? I came across something strange. This odd-looking lady with an afro. Who the heck was she, and what was her story? The picture stuck with me, so I decided to do a little digging. And oh boy, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I began my search by scouring the internet for pictures of other women matching this description, namely the big hair and short dress. At first, I thought it may be related to Amelia Bloomer's bloomer costume from the 1850s, but instead, I found something else. This picture of a woman who matches the description of mine, titled Circassian Beauty. After looking up that name, I discovered a lot more. Turns out the Circassian woman was a sideshow attraction that was popular from the 1850s to the 1880s. So most likely, my picture was a souvenir postcard from one of these circuses. But what even is a Circassian woman, or Circassian beauty as they're sometimes called? Well, that question led me down the first rabbit hole. The Circassian people came from Circassia, a country that used to be located on the Black Sea just above Georgia. That is, until Russia started invading in 1763. This led to a full-on war between the Circassians and the Russians, with the Circassians fighting to keep their homeland. Over the course of the war, around 1.5 million Circassians were forced to leave their homes and seek refuge elsewhere. In April of 1864, a letter was written to the Queen of England asking for aid, but they would receive no help. And in 1864, the final battle took place, with all 20,000 of the Circassian army being defeated by Russia's army of 100,000. And to this day, the displaced Circassians mourn the loss of their homeland. But what does all this sad history have to do with a circus sideshow attraction and my photograph? Well, it can all be traced back to one man, this guy. Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, a German anthropologist who spent his time studying skulls. His goal was to discover the origin of man and its different races. In 1779, he divided all the races into 5 groups. When studying the skull of a Circassian woman, he was apparently struck by its symmetry and beauty, and so decided,
"Ah yes, this skull is so symmetrical, so handsome and becoming. This must be where all the white race came from, since of course we are the most beautiful of all."
The idea stuck around, and this is where the term Caucasian comes from when referring to white people, which is still used today, though technically Caucasian should only refer to people from the Caucasus region. Thanks to Blumenbach, the idea that all white people came from the Caucasus region caught on. And because this one white man was a little bit too into the skull, the idea that Circassian women were the most beautiful of all women in all the world also caught on. The image of a Circassian beauty was used to sell hand cream and hair dye and basically anything else considered beautiful. This also led to, of course, the sexualization of these women. Because of their beauty, Circassian women were thought to be the most valued sex slaves in Turkish harems, and the most valued prostitutes. And so the Circassian woman would forever be linked to this idea of exoticism and sexuality. Now enter a man you're probably all familiar with, P.T. Barnum.
Ladies and gents, this is the moment you've waited for.
Hey, get out of there! You're gonna make people sick!
No, not that P.T. Barnum. The real P.T. Barnum. Phineas Taylor Barnum, American businessman and founder of the Barnum and Bailey Circus. Contrary to what certain movies may have you believe, the real P.T. Barnum was not a stand-up for the little guy and celebrate your differences kind of a person. This is the same man who said it was okay to use bull hooks on elephants because elephant skin is too thick to feel pain. His first success came when he purchased an enslaved elderly woman who apparently was so old and frail that people said she looked more like a skeleton with skin on it. Barnum used this to his advantage, saying not only was she 161 years old, but also was nurse to George Washington. Barnum put her on display all over the country, having her tell stories of a young George Washington as people gawked. She died less than a year later, and Barnum sold tickets to her live autopsy. So it should be no surprise that P.T. Barnum also used the myth of the Circassian Beauty, slave to the sultans, to his advantage. Barnum claimed that in his show he had a real Circassian princess who, after having to flee her homeland, was rescued from the slave markets of Constantinople by a man who was so taken with her striking hair and beauty that he rescued her and brought her to America, where she met Barnum and joined his show. Her name was Zulema Agra, the Star of the East. Of course, this entire backstory was made up by Barnum to sell more tickets, and many more similar performances would follow suit all over the country. In actuality, he just pulled a pretty girl off the street, gave her a costume, and called her Circassian. While we're at it, let's look at that costume. When I first came across my picture, the first thing that struck me was the afro and the short dress. But if we look at pictures of actual Circassian ladies, you will obviously find none of these things, as a traditional Circassian dress is a modest full-length gown with long sleeves and usually includes a head wrap of some sort, as the prominent religion in Circassia was Muslim. So then, where in the world did Barnum get the idea for his costume? Well, it all goes back to the Circassian stereotype of being erotic and exotic. Barnum basically took the fashionable dress of the day and modified it to be more revealing. More exotic-looking accessories would usually also be included, though sometimes a cross necklace was also added, to remind viewers that though she may be sexy, she's still a good Christian girl. Ignoring the fact that most real Circassians were Muslim, because if she's white, she must be Christian, right? But what about that hair? This element was also an invention by Barnum, sometimes referred to as moss hair, to make her look more exotic, since this type of hairstyle is mostly associated with black culture. But of course, none of the actresses that Barnum used actually had this hair naturally. This effect was achieved by teasing the hair with beer. Barnum and others would use this effect not only on Circassian women, but on any act that they wanted to feel more exotic, from snake charmers to albinos. There has been some theories that state that this hair may have been inspired by a traditional Circassian hat worn by men called a papaka, which was made from sheep's wool, which gave the wearer that fuzzy mop-top look. Though that implies that Barnum actually did any research when constructing his costume, which is highly unlikely. Not to mention the fact that these hats were traditionally worn by men, and the fact that I don't think anybody would actually confuse this for their hair. If I went out one day wearing a similar hat, I don't think anybody would actually believe I cut and bleached my hair. So this theory is most likely untrue. But Barnum didn't do any of this for no reason. He was an expert businessman and knew what the people wanted. And the caricature of the Circassian beauty was all about the juxtaposition of the familiar and the exotic. She was sexy, but chaste, foreign, but familiar, accessible, and forbidden. All of these elements combined to make a successful addition to Barnum's freak show. This whole sad situation reminds me a lot of that time that Victoria's Secret had one of their lingerie models dressed as a Native American, wearing a feather headdress over sexy lingerie, ignoring Native American women's long history of sexualization and resulting struggle with sexual violence and assault. According to research done by the National Congress of American Indians and Alaskan Natives are at least 2 times more likely to experience rape or sexual assault crimes compared to all other races. In light of all this, that Victoria's Secret model is not only in bad taste, but is actively harmful to the culture that it portrays. Much like the Circassians, the women of these so-called exotic cultures were objectified and victimized because of elements completely outside of their control. To quote the new Captain America,
We can do better.
"There's a lot of injustice in our world, and it shows no signs of getting any better until we can learn to treat each other with love and respect, no matter how different we may be or what we believe. No matter where we come from, even if we don't always agree with each other, this world has enough hate in it. It's time to spread love and respect to our fellow humans, because in the end, we all have a lot more in common than we have differences.